Um, so this is a great opportunity just to come up and talk to you guys a little bit about my story. And one of the common questions that I get, I go around talking to college students in schools, is how do you discover your passion? How do you figure out what you want to do and not just chase money? And so, for me, it became leaning into my mistakes. And growing up in South Central Los Angeles, I don't have the typical sob story. Grew up South Central, single parent home, but the difference is my father is a doctor. My mom was a social worker. My dad cheated on his wife and had me. And through this process, I became the mistake. And my mom ended up coming to Los Angeles because of my cousin. And I'm going to leave it there. Town moved to LA. My mom, who had just failed out of college, went with him. And she decided to start her life over. And so, as a social worker, she was trying to figure out what do I do? How do I make this happen? And when she was pregnant with me, she was like, working for the school system is a really powerful way of living a great life and raising a son. And so we lived in a small one-bedroom apartment for the first 12 years of my life. But that community was riddled with violence, gang. So I was brought up in the middle of where the LA riots started. The race relations were really tough, really hard. It was a scary time, and perception is reality. Everything around me was really scary, and I didn't know what to do with that. And so I also didn't have a place in school because when I was in school, I was getting kicked out of class. I was always getting into fights, talking back. By the time I was in eighth grade, I went to six different schools. And so the message became clear that school wasn't for me. And so what do you do with that? Luckily, I'm 6'5". I'm a pretty good athlete. And so I was able to use and focus myself on being an athlete rather than being a student and using that as my strength and my passion. But what I realized along the way is that just focusing in on basketball doesn't allow me to begin understanding other elements of my life and never really diving into what do I care about? What's meaningful? What am I good at? And that's where I began thinking about how do I begin taking steps, right? Whether the steps were backwards, forwards, sideways, it didn't matter. And so I began thinking about this once I graduated from Stonehill College. I ended up getting a job in real estate finance. I managed a portfolio of 72 million. I traveled the country, and I also was able to. So this is a cool story. So we managed property in Hawaii, and I was able to bring in 2015 with Larry Ellison, right? This is the lifestyle that I was living in real estate finance, but I was unhappy, right? Having a 2,000 square foot apartment in Boston, driving a BMW, doing all the things that we say monetarily really mean a lot, but I was destroyed because on paper, I was checking everything off. But emotionally, I was empty. And so I began, and it was a stat that hit me. Every 10 seconds, a kid is dropping out of school. Think about that. And where is that happening, typically? In rural communities and inner cities. And it's systematic, right? And so the next stat that got me was that majority of kids that are in the inner city don't have access to additional time of learning, right? So this is actually, when I came out to the East Coast, was the first time I ever saw a deer. It was the first time I went to bed and it was quiet. And so not having learning opportunities outside of school became really powerful for me, or understanding and thinking about that. And these are parts of the system that really got me jazzed up. And I started paying attention to what am I good at? What am I not good at? And this is where I began learning what my passion was beyond basketball. beyond the workplace, beyond making a lot of money. And so what really jazzed me up through this process was also just understanding the system gaps. Because what I've learned is that although there's a problem, there's always a solution. And even when you have that solution, there's going to be a brand new problem, right? And so back in 2010, the research said the kids were dropping out every 10 seconds. But now the dropout rate has reduced. But when we look at it, majority of kids in fourth grade aren't reading at grade level. And we know how important reading is because it's a part of everyday life. So what are young people doing with that? And so instead of focusing so much on the kids, I've decided to focus in on the system. And the way that I'm able to focus on the system is we want to begin helping superintendents and HR departments recruit and attract teachers to become future educators. Because when we look at the workplace, no one wants to be a teacher, right? The idea of going into an inner city, dealing with the problems and challenges isn't what anybody wants. But what's really interesting is there are a lot of kids in the inner city that want to stay there and they can become educators. And so what happens when we begin shifting their mindsets and thinking about education as a viable option? The same way we talk about STEM, the same way we talk about entrepreneurship, the same way we talk about tech is a really powerful way when we begin talking about education. And so without thinking about the crap part of education, right? Because you're in a classroom, it's a long day. How do we begin making it fun? How do we make learning something that actually changes young people's lives, right? And so we begin tapping kids as early as middle school to begin thinking about what education is all about and what it means to be an educator. So the way we do it is we have a college student who mentors a high school kid, and together they're running an after-school program to complete some form of a project. And through this project, they're going to be able to learn tangible skills that exposes them to the real world beyond what their community is about. And so this is how I've been able to figure out how do I begin thinking differently about how to make the impact in the world. And for us, our goal is to go across the country. We have a team of 6. We've raised $1 million each year, but our entire focus is solving the problem of helping superintendents hire and train future educators. And so when we look at the challenges that young people are facing, we know that the one common thread here is that teachers have the biggest impact on student achievement. And by promoting and getting young people to become educators, they begin changing their own lives. And so in this process, while we're thinking of what we're doing and what our passion is, we're trying to figure out how do we take this lessons of coaching and the lessons of change to provide a resource for young people, and not only young people, but for ourselves to get to the next stage and the next steps. And because we know that there is so much option and so much opportunity out there for young people, this is where we begin thinking very differently about how do we get young people not only to see themselves, or not see themselves, but I'm not supposed to say sorry, right? But not about seeing the tangible outcomes of making money, but begin learning themselves. Having conversations about what is your identity? What feels right? What are you good at? How do we begin shaping young people to actually be okay with saying, I'm okay with being bad at something because I'm not good at everything. And that's a concept that what we've learned in school doesn't exist, right? We use grades as a way of being punitive, right? Grades should be a data source or a data point that allows us to understand how to customize lessons to each kid to help them understand these challenges or their challenges. But it's actually not used that way, right? We track young people to being smart, average, and I'll say it nicely, behavioral problems, right? And so then they begin perceiving this as their reality. So they begin crippling what they believe as being their true purpose or what they're able to accomplish because of what we've told them along the way, right? How do we begin breaking that down? How do we begin having real conversations, right, that go beyond just our feelings, just what you're tangibly doing or what you're getting on a report card? How do we begin making sure, how do we make sure the young people know that no one is good at everything? And how do we begin pulling out the talents that they're working so hard to achieve, right? And so through this course and through the work that we're trying to accomplish, this is why our work is so important about passion and purpose. And my two favorite words are actually coaching and change. Coaching showcases a place where you begin thinking that you can actually grow and you're willing to be vulnerable, right? Change is a place where you're actually beginning to take action on it, right? And so without having that vision and without being able to take action, you're never really going to be able to identify those strengths and never identify what your true purpose is as you're going through the process. Because at some point, we have to be able to take control over our actions, our thoughts, and our mindsets. But we're not training young people how to do that, especially in inner cities. And so by training young people and training teachers to think differently about how they're approaching and working with kids, we begin understanding and seeing a huge morph, or people begin morphing how they're approaching their work. And so when we're thinking about this, I actually challenge a lot of our young people. I challenge them around taking a second to stop, to think about who they want to be and what actual tangible skills they need to develop along the way, because it's not just about the vision. It's about being able to take the steps and take the actions that allow them to really develop and grow. So I would love to kind of open it up, see if there's any questions here around my work or the work that we're doing, and have a dialogue around people interested in how I discovered my passion and having that conversation.
Yeah. Thank you, Marcus. While people are perhaps thinking, can I just start off with a question? When you talk about coaching, could you say a little bit more about how you think about coaching versus telling? Define what coaching actually means for you.
So coaching always starts with the individual's aspirations. And so the only way that you can begin coaching, at least within our world, is being able to understand who that person is. Then you begin understanding where they want to go. And so now you're helping them navigate through the various roadblocks that they're encountering within their world to be able to achieve the goal that they're trying to achieve, and helping them understand how to overcome those obstacles.
Okay. I'm falling behind already.
Are you putting together a consortium of resources for the kids who do want to be teachers if they want to leave the inner city? There's so much of a challenge, both not just financially to stay in school, but for all the other ways it takes to stay in college. What does the whole program encompass?
Yeah, so what we're doing right now is we're building a dual enrollment program. So typically, so for everyone, dual enrollment is when you're in high school, you begin earning college credits. And so what we know is that young people, when you're middle class or suburban, take advantage of dual enrollment. And so now we're helping young people that are in the inner city get access to college credits while in high school.
Hi, thank you so much. How do I turn this thing on? Hello? Hi, thank you so much. I really love your mission, and what I'm curious about is when you are talking to someone who doesn't have the frame of mind or exposure to what coaching is, such as an inner city kid, how do you even introduce the concept and help them to relate to it? Because it can be so foreign.
Yeah. So it makes it all relatable. So it's all about the kid and what their desires and wants are, right? So the easiest conversation that we have, or at least in my world, it's kids want to be musicians or athletes. And so rather than talking about the steps it takes to get to the NBA or to become a professional athlete, we talk about the skill sets that they need. And in a digital world right now where Facebook and Snapchat and social media are so prevalent, we need to help young people overcome obstacles, right? And because kids are so ready to quit. As soon as something gets hard, they're done, right? So how do we begin engaging them in the process? And a lot of it's around, instead of telling them what coaching is, it's building that relationship with them to see things differently and shifting the mindset and having conversations with them to shed a different light on the perspective.
Right. Over here.
I'm Phil Holberton, and my question is, as you characterize the students, closer. There you go.
You can't talk with your hands and hold the mic, apparently.
I'm part Italian. Any event, so my question is around when you characterize this kids as smart, average, or behavior problems. Mm-hmm. And if you try to coach somebody that has a behavior problem, their sense of self is not very high. So as a coach, how do you, and you talked about coaching, working with their aspirations. If you're working with an individual who you think has more potential than what their aspirations, how do you break them free to try to get a higher plane to work towards?
Yeah. So what we've done in this process is, by understanding where kids are starting, it's not about our expectations, right? So we oftentimes have the conversations of what we should, what we could, what we're supposed to do. But if a kid is dealing with trauma, right? If a kid has no one at home, right? We have to understand where their starting point is rather than putting our expectation on them, right? And so being able to show them how to grow is way more important than telling them what they're supposed to do.
It'll come on when you start talking.
Oh, will it? Okay, there we go. Thank you very much for your talk. I'm really curious. Something you mentioned is the struggle of kind of attracting and retaining the teachers in inner city conditions, and I just wondered kind of what your thought is on the best way to make that a reality.
So I think that what we're trying to figure out right now and what we're working on is giving teachers more power, right? So typically when we're working in schools, the teacher has control over their classroom, but the way in which the schools are structured, they don't have the power to, or their voices aren't heard within the system, right? So whether it's a behavioral issue, whether it's enrichment programs, whatever it is, how do we give teachers an opportunity to bring themselves to the workplace so that now they're able to really enjoy work? Because the more our teachers enjoy it, the more the kids are going to be able to flourish and feel that connection.
Great, a question back here. And I'm not doing my job very well. I'm not reminding you to introduce yourself and give us your 10-word introduction and pause before asking a question.
There we go. Hi, I'm John Boisvert from Needham, Massachusetts. My question has to do with power. It also has to do with the system. Mm-hmm. And my belief that educators and teachers are not respected, they don't have the power. And back to a comment about money, is there's no money there.
Yeah.
So how do you change the system? What do you do to actually get to a place where the teachers and the educators are respected, do have power, and do make some money so that they feel like it's worthwhile?
So I think this is one of the common threads and common themes that that I run into. And I often say this, and it's not popular. School systems have tons of money, right? It's $100 million, right? Like every school district is operating with more than let's call it 20 million, right? And so it's a matter of allowing leaders to think differently so that they can actually allow teachers to make decisions so that these things happen. And so the key here is breaking down the power structure within school buildings so that teachers have more of a say. And around the students' side of it, it's more about letting their voices be heard and begin understanding what kids are trying to develop and learn. Because so often we're purchasing so much, we're spending a lot of money on curriculums that we're shoving down kids' throats, right? And I remember when I was in school, I couldn't relate to Huck Finn, right? The idea of open pastures and white fences and painting, who did that, right? And so being able to be flexible to make things more relatable, I think that is where it happens. But I also think that the structure just needs to be blown up a little bit so that teachers have more of a say, because the money is there. It's just a matter of how we use it, and not just trying to check the boxes off because of protocols.
Hey, Marquis. This is George. So I provide, or my company provides, technology for education.
Mm-hmm.
The way we see it in today is that teachers have to almost have superpowers.
Yeah.
It's like we're throwing technology to them and say, okay, deal with it, thinking that they might know everything. In addition, thinking that they might know all the skills that are needed in today's world while the economy is changing so fast. And in addition, what you just mentioned earlier, that they might be as well therapists, having to deal with the kids, each individual kid's problems, issues that they might have. Now, I love your mission. Is absolutely, I think education should be #1 in the world, in addition to getting back to being humans and not just money. But anyway, that mission, it's difficult to accomplish, right? But talking about money, have you ever guys thought of doing partnerships with even, for example, let's say, other friends or publishers? Because you guys are in the field.
Yeah.
The data you have, the feedback you have, it's super powerful, super it's I would say it's gold for publishers, universities, or even other entities, organizations that can come in and help you and empower you guys in making that job better and even more global, I would say, to extend the reach. An example is like publishers who are doing the curriculums, and they might have some feedback from the field, but that kind of feedback, I think it's even more precious.
Yeah.
Partnerships. Big friends.
Definitely.
That was a lot of questions.
Yeah, was that a question or?
Do you guys have any partnerships with other organizations to help empower your mission?
Yeah, so what we're doing right now is we partner with higher ed to work with local school districts, and we're working with different curriculums. So Houghton Mifflin, we're beginning to work with them right now on delivering our content, but we're also building a consultant and online platform, because right now we have eight school districts right now interested in the work we're doing. And so from a business side, how do we keep our costs down using technology as a platform that allows us to go across the country?
Great.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hey, I'm John Peterson. I create leadership experiences for entrepreneurs. And my question is really about how you help people, and particularly students, like find their passion and purpose when they're coming to you saying, I want to be a musician, I want to be an athlete. Like they're really chasing that for the money, and they don't have a different model of the world. Like, how do you help them see past the money and those opportunities?
So we break it down into the skills rather than thinking about like the lifestyle, because I think that's where we often have a lot of conversations is lifestyles, but it's really about what skills you're developing in the place that you currently are. Because what we found is that without identifying your strengths and without identifying your weaknesses, there's no way that you can actually begin making progress. And so by identifying whatever that skill is, having kids talk about how they feel, what are they good at, what are they not good at, because they might then decide, I'm going to get rid of this because I'm not going to go down this path because I'm actually not that good at it. I'll use it as a hobby, right? And so I think, and the way we talk to our kids, knowing what you're good at is just as valuable as knowing what you're not good at.
Yeah.
Interesting. Steve Little, Zero Limits Ventures. I'm really intrigued by this whole process. And it seems like, and maybe I'm stating the obvious here, that what you're doing is basically building a set of best practices or a new teacher curriculum where we're going to improve the teacher's capacity to coach as opposed to just educate. Do I have that right?
Yeah.
Okay. And so doesn't that change teacher education?
Yeah.
So
can I chime in real quick?
yeah, you can
And then
anticipate my question.
So one of the coolest things that we've just found out is the biggest problem is your first 3 years being a teacher, there's about a 70% turnover rate.
Yeah.
And so you're either leaving schools or leaving the profession altogether, right? But what we've learned is, and the average college kid is going to spend 1,800 hours in a college classroom. For an educator, there's only 5%, right? You're only spending 100 hours actually ever leading a classroom. So if you're a lawyer, you typically go to law school, then you're going to work under someone for a while, and then you grow to partner. As a doctor, you work under someone, go to school, work under someone, then you become a doctor, right? In education, you learn some skills and you're thrown to the wolves, right? This is what we're trying to begin to change.
Right. So you're going to change the face of the profession completely in a good way, of course.
Yes.
So how do we get that en masse?
It's policy,
Policy. Okay.
changing the policy, right? So right now, if we look at policy, you only have to spend 100 hours leading a classroom. And so if you're not thinking about how do we get more practice time, and if you're not thinking about where can we use it, right? So typically we think of training teachers during the school day. What about the summer? What about after school? What about vacation, right? What about using coaching, right? What are the alternative methods that allow young people to develop teaching and leadership skills that isn't traditionally the school day? Because when you think about teaching and educating young people, majority of the relationships that you're getting that are really valuable to kids is at the local barbershop. It's on the street corner, right? So the first time that I got coached in a real way was when I was in 7th grade. And it was by the local gangster, right? He had shot 15 people, had been in and out of prison, but our commonality was that we both had been to 6 schools in 8 years, right? And so he's the one that pushed me away because he started showing me his scars.
So it's interesting. You don't need the mic. It's a push-pull.
Right.
So on the one side is you're trying to change the dynamic of teaching, of education, basically, just completely re-engineer it. At the same time, it seems like what would help is if there was a high order of demand.
Right. And so right now, there's a massive need for teachers. Right. And so by giving people the opportunity to begin experiencing teaching starting in middle school, now they begin seeing it differently. Because then it doesn't matter what society says, right? Because I've experienced changing your life. I've experienced helping you because I myself was once a struggling kid, right? And so, at least here in Massachusetts, the lifestyle's pretty good, right? Like you're making an average of $75,000, but our top teachers are making about $115, right? And this is now how we could begin having these conversations because the benefit in a lifestyle of being an educator is really good, especially when you have a family.
at the risk of making an assumption about age, which I know is always a big risk, perhaps there's someone who's a bit closer to that experience with a question.
A little bit. Hi, I'm Lincoln. I'm a white guy at Harvard studying physics.
What's up, white guy at Harvard?
That's me. So you talked about using grades as less of a punitive measure, and talking more about using that as data points and statistics. And I fully agree with that. I'm wondering what your ideas are on how that change gets put into place. I feel like that's kind of what you were talking about there, and what people around the community and in the community can do to support that.
Yeah, so I think that one of the key elements around grades is just changing our mindsets around it, right? And so I think that I'm going to pick on Harvard and MIT for a little bit, right? When there's this gravitas, right, of being a Harvard grad or an MIT grad, and that network defines you, right? We need to do that. That's what grades do. It defines you, right? How do we actually begin changing mindsets, right? Like, how many people in here have kids? How many people in here actually talk to their kids about their effort? But how much of that effort is based on how well they did? Right? So thinking of it this way, right? Like, when you get a C, that's actually okay if you put in the effort, right? But if you didn't put in effort, that's a completely different ballgame, right? Like, using data grades in that manner, and as a community, that's how we begin changing the mindsets and the conversations, because part of the challenge is by focusing in on what you're supposed to get, we're telling kids that they're not good enough even when they're trying, right? And that's the biggest element here, right? Because I never got better than a C- in science. Never be a scientist. And that's a good thing, right? That's good. But we don't talk that way, right? We have to be good at everything. And that's kind of the societal mindset shift that we need to begin having, because we're never going to be good at everything, right?
Hey, Marquis. Mike Lorette. I help entrepreneurs get the resources they need to succeed. And what I haven't heard too much is your entrepreneur's journey. You're a couple years into it.
Yeah.
You're a not-for-profit. So you're a startup right in the trenches. What are your biggest challenges, your biggest successes? What do you need from this group?
Yeah, so my biggest, I'll go with the biggest success so far. We've been able to grow from 1 school to 8 schools. And right now we're realizing that there's more of a demand and need than we thought. Our biggest challenge right now is identifying how and what that looks like. So are we going to grow through a direct service model where we go in and run our programs, or are we going to begin consulting with schools so that they begin changing their own systems, right? So it's really designing what growth looks like so that we can impact over 1 million kids a year. So from this group, if I can meet with people around technology experts, people that understand funding, and then also just people that understand like talent development. That's really where we're working to grow and really launch our organization.
Maybe I can just ask one sort of addendum to that question as a way of wrapping up. In addition to what could people in the room do to be helping you, is there one piece of advice or request that you'd give to all of us, something that you think that you would like us to do or be able to do?
Yeah. So Valerie said something that really hit me, right? Is that being able to accept the fact that women are always thinking of to-do lists and guys can sit and do nothing, right? Or have empty minds. I'm actually glad my wife wasn't here because she would be all over me for that. But begin identifying our weaknesses. Begin asking yourself, what are you okay with being bad at? Because that allows for you to begin understanding what your passions and what you actually care about, because being bad at something is just as good as being good at something.
That's a great way to finish. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.